जिंद शामी आने के तले आजा जरी वाले नीले आसमाने के तले जय हो. In this video, we will be discussing India during the classical era. The big questions we need to be able to answer after watching this video are: first, why are empires less common in Indian history than, say, in China or in the Mediterranean region or in the Middle East? Two, how did the Maurya and Gupta unite their empires? So we'll be talking about those two exceptions to the general rule, the Maurya and the Guptas, who were able to form empires for a short period of time during the classical era. And then three, what technological advances were made during the Gupta Empire? So the first big question, why are empires less common in Indian history? So the last time we were in South Asia, we were discussing the Indus River Valley civilization, or sometimes referred to as the Harappan civilization. And if you'll recall, there was a sort of mysterious and sudden disappearance of the Indus River Valley civilization. And it was shortly after that disappearance that there was a migration of peoples into the Indian subcontinent known as the Aryans or the Indo-Europeans. And they were lighter-skinned people. So following the collapse of the Indus River Valley civilization, these Indo-Europeans, known as Aryans, migrated into the Indian subcontinent, and that detail is going to be important later on when we start discussing Hinduism and the caste system. So just plant that seed and later on it'll germinate. So back to the big question. So why was it so difficult in India for empires to form? One of the reasons why it's so difficult is because India is incredibly diverse. It's culturally diverse. It's ethnically diverse. There are many different religions that were practiced in the region. There were many different languages that are spoken on the Indian subcontinent, and it's still incredibly diverse today. So we can see this modern day map of the languages spoken in India today. The predominant language is Hindi, but there are many others like Bengali and Urdu and Punjabi. We can also see a map showing the various religious traditions. The predominant religion is Hinduism, with about 80% of the people in India practicing Hinduism today. But we can see strong pockets of Islam, some pockets of Buddhism and Christianity, and then Jainism and Sikhism as well. So as a result of all of this diversity, political fragmentation essentially became the norm in India. In other words, India has, for the most part, been decentralized with lots of smaller, more localized control by various princes or regional rulers. Now, we discussed how the Persian Achaemenid Empire stretched all the way to the Indus River Valley. Later, the Persians would be conquered by Alexander the Great and Alexander's empire. So it's basically those two empires on its boundary that introduced the Indian subcontinent to the concept of empire, or a centralized political control, or a centralized state. And so there would be two empires that formed during the classical era. The first is known as the Mauryan Empire. It lasts from 324 to 184 BCE, so not a significant period of time, just around 150 years the Mauryan Empire was around. And also later the Gupta Empire from 320 to 550 CE. Both these empires briefly unified India during the classical era, and again, they are the exception, although we will spend more time focusing on those two empires because it's far harder to study regions where there is decentralized political control. It's just too complex, and so we tend to spend more time focusing on the easier to explain empires like the Mauryan and the Gupta. So the second big question we need to be able to answer is, how did the Mauryan and Gupta unite these empires? So Chandragupta Maurya founded the Mauryan Empire in 324 BCE. Don't get confused because later we'll talk about the Gupta Empire, but Chandragupta Maurya is the founder of the Mauryan Empire. Now, it's Chandragupta Maurya's grandson, though, who's the person that you really need to know from classical India, a man named Ashoka. And Ashoka completed the unification process. He spread the Mauryan Empire down into the more southern region of India. And Ashoka experienced this really important event and turning point in his life when he was fighting a war against the Kalingas. And it was a very destructive war, lots of blood that was shed on the battlefield. According to the stories, so much blood that the river ran red. And Ashoka had this awakening or realization that he should convert. He was born into the Hindu tradition and he would convert to the religion of Buddhism. And this will all make a lot more sense when we actually get around to studying Buddhism in a couple of videos. So Ashoka converts to Buddhism after a bloody war against the Kalingas. And Ashoka basically adopts a policy of nonviolence, of tolerance. He chooses a path to try and establish himself as being a benevolent leader. He tries to engender love by foregoing violence and adopting some of the more nonviolent principles of Buddhism. We're going to see this theme throughout Indian history later on with leaders in Indian history, such as Gandhi, who also are going to adopt very similar approaches involving peace and nonviolence and tolerance, and that traditionally begins with Ashoka. Now, Ashoka, in order to spread this message, in order to unify the Mauryan people, he builds a series of stupas, which are Buddhist shrines. They're dome-like in shape. And he also built a number of rock pillar edicts, which you will see here, these rock pillars with text inscribed on them and a lion at the top. So these stupas and edicts would promote Buddhism and describe how this battlefield conversion came about. Now, the Mauryans developed an elaborate bureaucracy. That was another way in which Ashoka and later emperors were able to unify such large, diverse territory, much like the earlier Persians, establishing a bureaucracy. And like the Persians, they had a network of spies to ensure that the local leaders who were delegated control were acting in the best interests of the emperor. So after Ashoka's death, though, decentralized rule is going to return to India. As you can see, all of these various kingdoms and principalities that were smaller in structure. Now, in terms of the Gupta Empire, one way in which they were able to unify and unite their empire is through the participation in trade. So the Guptas were heavily involved in trade along the Silk Road trade network, which spanned Eurasia. And also down here, they were involved in Indian Ocean sea lane trade. Now, what kind of commodities or goods were the Indians trading? What did the Chinese, what did the Persians want from India? They wanted spices, such as pepper. Especially the Romans, the Roman Empire during the Classical Age, loved some pepper. So be aware of the emerging spice trade that's being exchanged both along the Silk Road and also the Indian Ocean sea lanes, and those spices that are unique to India that were highly valued in other regions around the world. Now, the Gupta Empire is going to end with an external invasion by a group known as the White Huns. These are pastoral nomadic peoples, and so you can draw a similarity between the way in which the Gupta Empire ended with the invasions by pastoral nomadic groups With the same thing, the Han Chinese eventually collapsing as a result of invasions by a group known as the Xiongnu, and also in the Roman Empire, which ends as a result of invasions by Germanic people like the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. So what technological advancements were made during the Gupta Empire? So the Gupta Empire is really considered a golden age of Indian culture and history. And it's during this golden age that we're going to see a number of advances made in South Asia. First, they made advances in medicine. They developed inoculations. They were the first to practice C-sections as a way of delivering babies. They developed plastic surgery, not for cosmetic reasons, but instead for health reasons. So advancements in medicine by the Gupta Empire. They also made advancements in astronomy. So they were able to calculate the solar year to 365.24 days. They understood that the Earth was round and made a lot of advancements in astronomy. They also made a lot of advancements in mathematics. So they developed a system of numerals that is seen here. That numeral system spread to the Islamic caliphates, and so we will refer to the number system that we're going to eventually adopt as the Arabic numbers, but in fact, a more historically accurate name for them would be the Indo-Arabic numerals. They understood and utilized the concept of zero, which is a really critical concept for developing mathematical systems. And we can compare that to, for instance, the Romans. If you know anything about Roman numerals, right, there's no zero in Roman numerals, and therefore the system, because it lacks a placeholder, doesn't work. They also understood the concept of pi and utilized it in their mathematics. So lots of advancements in science and mathematics are attributed to the Gupta Empire. So the big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, why are empires less common in Indian history? Second, how did the Maurya and Gupta unite their empires and essentially become an exception to the general rule of decentralized political states in India? And third, what technological advancements were made during the Gupta Empire? Thanks for tuning in. आजा आजा जिंद शामी आने के तले आजा जरी वाले नीले आसमाने के तले जय हो. In this video, we will be discussing India during the classical. We're discussing the Indus River Valley civilization, or sometimes referred to as the Harappan civilization. And if you'll recall, there was a sort of mysterious and sudden disappearance of the Indus River Valley civilization. And it was shortly after that disappearance that there was a migration of peoples into the Indian subcontinent known as the Aryans or the Indo-Europeans. And they were lighter-skinned people. So following the collapse of the Indus River Valley civilization, these Indo-Europeans, known as Aryans, migrated into the Indian subcontinent, and that detail is going to be important later on when we start discussing Hinduism and the caste system. So just plant that seed and later on it'll germinate. So back to the big question. So the big questions we need to be able to answer after watching this video are: first, why are empires less common in Indian history than, say, in China or in the Mediterranean region or in the Middle East? Two, how did the Maurya and Gupta unite their empires? So we'll be talking about those two exceptions to the general rule, the Maurya and the Guptas, who were able to form empires for a short period of time during the classical era. And then three, what technological advances were made during the Gupta Empire? So the first big question, why are empires less common in Indian history? So the last time we were in South Asia,